I'd now like to give the floor to the members of the Commission of Inquiry for their concluding remarks. Mr. President, thank you. I will provide some replies, and my colleagues will follow me. Mr. President, the main question asked by the Commission is as follows. The history of Burundi is a history of political violence and human rights violations in all electoral contexts in that country. Now, it turns out that they are now gearing up for elections in 2020. So the question is simply this. Our previous report documents the persistence of human rights violations. By that I mean there are continued violations of human rights, and we're not the only ones doing it. The United Nations is saying this, as are the NGOs. But the question is whether the electoral context is such that it will change from persistence to aggravated human rights violations. So we very objectively looked at the political area, and what we're trying to do is to document the changes in the situation, and to do so by way of a warning to the international community, because it is our thinking that the international community must, as we have already said, be even more vigilant concerning the situation in Burundi. Mr. President, the second issue is that the forces are such that the Catholic Church is warning us of a worsening of the situation. They recently published a statement asking questions and expressing its concern at the risk of human rights violations. And the Catholic Church also did the same thing in the context of the referendum. Therefore, this is a domestic body and independent. So what we as the COI is being asked to do is to document this by going to the country, to talk to the Burundian authorities, and to hear how they see human rights playing out in practice, and to reflect this in our report, but also to meet with the other stakeholders in Burundian society and then come back to council with an objective portrait. But we have worrying elements. There's silence and invisibility. Silence of all mechanisms and institutions that are victims in Burundi. The authorities in Burundi have literally succeeded in creating a vacuum, and then the victims are invisible. They are unable to express themselves, and it's hard to reach them. Therefore, in conclusion, as far as my information is concerned, there is cause to believe that this is important. Will there be a persistence or an aggravation of human rights violations in Burundi? And the second point is, and this is a key factor, is that of impunity, because there are more violations only because the perpetrators of serious violations are not held accountable. And the third remark I'd make by way of conclusion is that the cooperation of Burundi with the United Nations regional and international mechanisms and institutions is important, and even the African Union is now unable to go to Burundi and to help the Burundian people. So the question of the mandate of the Commission is to be able, in this context leading up to the elections, to be able to ensure that the vigilance of the international community is objectively documented, to help Burundi to organize the elections that could prove decisive. And finally, there is an emerging and very worrisome question, which is that of the ethnic dimension. Now, will this ratchet up the situation in the pre-electoral period? In this region, this is a time bomb. So we also have to document this ethnic time bomb.